So let us get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anthony Volin. I'm the owner and broker of the Collective Realty. Thank you guys for joining us. This is our second State of the LA real estate market, where we will be covering residential and multifamily issues. So we're so happy to have you. I just posted a poll up. So if you see that, we'd love to get a sense of who's on the call. If you're you can answer more than one. So if you're a realtor, multifamily owner, residential owner, or hope to buy soon, let us know so we could really make sure we gear this call towards you. So far, it looks like we have a lot of multifamily owners and realtors, some residential owners as well. So we'll leave that open for a few minutes, but thank you for filling that out. We have a few other polls that we'll be launching early a little bit later on in our session as well. So just to give you a rundown, we have some great panelists that are here today. We have a couple of realtors that are here, Ms. Yolanda Carroll and Will Tiao. Will is also the director of our commercial division and does amazing work with multifamily and residential. So he'll be here to give us his insight. We have Carol Glover, who's a real estate attorney, who's going to talk to us about some landlord-tenant issues, as well as some issues she's seen happening between realtors and sellers that are happening now in the state of environment that we are in, and anything else she wants to talk about. And we have Zoe from Stewart Title, who will give us some stats and let us know what's happening on her end as far as title and recording and all of that kind of fun stuff. And we have an amazing lender, Marty Carey with Arcstone Financial, who really is going to keep us up to date on who's buying right now, how can you buy, what's happening with the lending market, and give us another sense there. So again, if you do have questions, please fill that out down at the bottom. We'd love to answer them. You can do that at any time. And again, thank you guys so much for joining. So I'm going to get my notes and some stats with a few important things to get our meeting started. Also, if you guys would like to see this meeting anytime later on, it will be on our YouTube page, so you can search the Collective Realty on YouTube and check that out, as well as our last sessions, and see some of our current listings that we have as well that we did virtual tours for you. So where are we at right now? What's going on? So the latest that I have heard was today, LA County. Some good news for many businesses that as of Friday, many businesses will be allowed to open that offer curbside pickup. So if you are a florist, a car dealer, which is curbside pickup, I know not quite, but as long as you're maintaining the social distance rules, car dealerships will be allowed to reopen, as well as retailers that sell toys, books, clothing, sporting goods, music, and so on for curbside pickup. We're also going to have hiking trails that will open, and many of the trails that are busier, I'm sure like Runyon Canyon, they will be monitored to make sure that social distancing is still maintained so that you don't get stuck with a fine. So that's phase one. Phase two is going to be more things like bars and restaurants, and we're not sure when that'll happen, but many people are saying not till later on this summer. So where does that play into what's going to happen the rest of this year? The few scenarios that I've been hearing, more and more about realities of what could happen is, we may have a slowdown in cases and transmissions this summer, as long as we maintain these social distance rules with some of these safer businesses opening. But as more things start to reopen, as more people start to get out there, even with these safe rules, there will be another spike at some point. And many people are saying that'll happen towards the end of the summer, beginning of fall. A lot of the other people are predicting that the situation that we're in, it's just going to be a wave of up and down, up and down. There'll be bumps going up, and they'll try to slow them down, up and down. But it's something that we're going to be in throughout the rest of this year and into next year. This is not something that we're going to have a slow reopening, and all of a sudden things are going to slowly get back to normal. Most people don't think that will happen. If that did, there would be way too many cases. The hospitals would get inundated and death rates would soar. So we really are going to have a slow reopening, and our businesses, for all of us, will be different. They will not be business as usual, but we still are going to be reopening businesses and trying to reinvent how we do things. So how has this affected real estate? Well, we'll get a lot of details from our speakers later on today, but overall demand absolutely has fallen. There's not as many buyers out there as there was. just a couple months ago. Many people have lost their jobs. Many people just don't want to go out there and look. There's a much smaller demand. So loans are not quite as easy to get as before, so less people have jobs and there are less people qualified to buy. So yes, demand is definitely down. Sales have fallen. There have not been as many closings. And Zoe can talk more about that. I mean, we've noticed in our office a pretty steep decline in closings for April. March was still pretty normal, but April was pretty slow. And predictions for May is actually about the same as April. So we're not seeing a continuing dive. We've seen it kind of flatten, but it's a slower level and continuing to go on. So now one surprising thing and important thing to notice is that inventory has shrunken even more than our sales have fallen, even more than our demand, and even more than what our demand has fallen. So if that's the case, if you do simple up economics, if our inventory has shrunken even more, it's not putting pressure on prices to go down at such a steep rate right now. Many sellers that I've talked to and that I have personally have said that they don't believe that they need to reduce prices right now. They just believe that the reason why their home is not selling is because people aren't able to get in to see them, or they're not wanting to see them, or because of city and state rules that are out there, they're just not being seen as much. So they don't believe that they need to have a price reduction. That being said, there are some buyers who are saying, well, we're just going to wait, and they're staying off on the sidelines. But overall, the sellers are not really reducing prices so much this year. One stat that I pulled when I looked at price reductions for April of this year compared to April of last year, there was actually less price reductions this year than there was last year. So, we're not in a spiraling downfall of market where prices are coming down. So if you're a buyer and you think prices are rapidly going to be coming down, we're not at that point yet. I don't know if we ever will be. We'll discuss that and get everyone's opinion on that. So sellers believe that their houses aren't selling because they're not being able to be seen and they're waiting. Most economists that I have been following say this year, they believe that prices will end up closing out as far as home values about 2 to 3% lower than last year. That's not that much. A lot of buyers are thinking maybe prices are going to come 10, 20% down. Well, economists aren't quite thinking that yet because the amount of inventory that's out there is so low. As a realtor, we are getting quite a few messages that are coming soon listings that are out there. Their agents are saying, hey, get ready. We have listings that are coming soon. We're getting more of that. So we know that the supply will come out more, but we also know the demand for housing is going to start to increase as well. So last week, LA City and LA County are now on the same wavelength where showings are allowed. Before, if you were in LA City, you were not allowed to see properties unless they were vacant. Currently, you can see properties in LA County and LA City if they are occupied, as long as the seller agrees to that. So since that ordinance went out, it's really changed the mindset of buyers as well as realtors and some sellers. It's changed the mindset of buyers more. For sure, we've been seeing a lot more calls come in for properties that are for lease or for sale, more from buyers, but we haven't been seeing a huge influx in residential listings. But Will has a different side to that I'm sure he'll show, where listings for multifamily might be a different story, at least for some people. So it's pretty interesting what's going on. What's going to be happening next? We have a big wild card, mortgage forbearances. This is going to be what's really going to shape prices and if they come down or not. So as far as we see right now, if people cannot afford to pay their mortgage, they're getting a forbearance, or they're figuring out some way to delay their payment, have it forgiven until later, depending on who their servicer is, but they're not going into foreclosure right now, right? But will that happen in 6 months or 12 months? That's definitely something to be seen. If the market improves in another 12 months or 18 months, we may not see that influx of foreclosures coming to the market. Now, even if there is a wave of foreclosures that come into the market, Most economists also are thinking that the demand still will be higher than what the inventory is that comes on that's foreclosures. So many people are still thinking that the demand is still there, inventory is still low, that it's not going to completely wash out the market where prices suddenly drop quite a bit. Now, again, every city, every state, every neighborhood is going to be a little different, and we're going to have a different experience everywhere. But this is kind of an overall generalization, and I would love to hear from some of our realtors and lenders to think what they think is going to happen in LA and what's already been happening now. So with that being said, the good news is that real estate is an essential business. We just got word that LA County is going to be opening some businesses. To me, this is a huge mindset change where people will start to venture out. Hopefully they venture out very safely and cautiously. But if they start to venture out to go buy a t-shirt, you know, a home is a much more urgent matter for many people to sell or to buy, where I'm sure more and more people are going to be listing and viewing properties as the weeks go forward. And as I said, we're already starting to see that just because LA City said you are allowed to show properties at this point. So if you have any questions, anyone, please make sure you type them in. We'd love to get everything answered. We're going to close out our poll in just a minute. So if you want to mark down who you are, we have about 45% of the people on our realtors, 33% are multifamily owners, 23% are residential owners, and 18% hope to buy soon. We have about 50 people on the call. And again, you can answer more than one of these questions. You can pick realtor and multifamily owner. If you're a smart realtor, that's going to be you. And next, I would like to move into some feedback from some of our agents, Will T. our commercial director, and Yolanda Carroll. I really want to hear from you guys with your on-the-ground experience, what you're noticing, what you're seeing. So why don't we start with the residential part first. So Yoli, if you have anything you'd like to fill us in with, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Yolanda Carroll, as Anthony said, and I am a realtor here at the Collective Realty. And what I really wanted to do was to share with people who are considering buying or selling, to let them know a couple of the experiences that I encountered since COVID-19. So, so on the buyer side, on the seller side, I had I'm saying have, well, have still, we're in escrow, a client, and her home is occupied. So it's, since it's not vacant, we had to go through a few different precautions. One thing that she let me know, is that she didn't want to have any open houses. So I just want to let you know about the timeline. We actually put the house on the market around, I think it was March 13th. So it was maybe the 15th, right before there were any stay-at-home orders or anything like that. But she already had the presence of forethought to say that she didn't want any open houses. She only wanted to open it up to serious buyers, just to limit, the amount of people who were in the house. So that's what we did. Never had more than 4 people. Actually, on one time had 4 people in the house. So that was a couple, buyer's agent and myself. And again, she was already prepared. She had already purchased gloves, had those sitting out on the counter, disinfectant. She had masks and booties. She had everything. So I didn't have to bring it, but it's a good thing to do. If you decide to go out, that you want to make sure you have those things. And things have been put in place now by the California Association of Realtors to safeguard people. But anyway, what I did to prepare for that is that I had as many doors open as I could, light switches on. Of course, you want to have that, as much light in as possible, had curtains up. So, to limit the touching of the property. And then after people left, I wiped down the doors and the light switches and the latches to the gates and all those things, just so that the seller would be comfortable when she came back home. The buyers were very, very patient and understanding, and they welcomed the gloves and were actually pleasantly surprised when they saw what was there for them for their protection. So that was like the showing side of it. Once we got into escrow, then there's inspections that went on, and the inspectors were very, very thoughtful as well. And again, this is before there were any orders mandating that you had to have a mask and all these things. Well, they came with their masks, they came with their gloves, they came with their booties. And then after they left, again, I wiped down the property before I locked up. So, you know, again, you know, if you're a seller, if you're thinking about selling, you want to hold off because you're concerned that there are no safeguards or people are not being careful. I think that it's very possible. It is possible, and it can be done. Now on the buyer side, it was a little easier. I didn't have to, you know, go through all of the wiping down and what have you and provide booties. I have a buyer who actually closed the other day. But before that, I showed him homes virtually, right? So I sent him links on videos. There were 3D tours. There were even slideshows, and he looked at them. But ultimately what he did was he decided to go with a new build that we had seen before the COVID-19 issue happened. So he decided to go with that. And so as we prepared to close, there were only a couple of things that he had to do in person. One was the walkthrough, to actually look at the property before he purchased it to make sure that everything that was to be in the property was there. The gentleman that helped us out, that was there for the walkthrough, he was already his mask on, his gloves, he provided booties, and again, just wanted us to feel protected and safe as he walked through. The other thing that he had to do in person was sign his loan docs. You know, this, as far as I know, they still need to be signed in person. So, you know, he had to do that in person. And that's pretty much it as far as the experience for buying and selling. So, you know, if you're thinking about buying or selling, you know, you really should know that there are safeguards and guidelines that are out there to protect you. So you should, you know, really consider moving forward with it. And then also, Marty's going to talk about this. Rates are amazing right now. So it's really a good time to buy. And there's really not that much competition because people are a little leery about going out. So, you know, if you're a brave new soul, you know that we have these protections out there. You should take advantage of what's going on out there. If anybody has any questions also, they can ask.
I guess I will go ahead and start. Thank you, Yoli.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. As Anthony said, my name is Will Tiao. I am the director of the commercial division here at the Collective Realty. My specialty is in multifamily sales. We also have a property management company called Tiao Properties, and we manage a little under 200 units. To say these are trying times for multifamily owners is a bit of an understatement. I would say there's 3 different ways that multifamily owners feel like they're under, I don't want to say attack, but definitely under a lot of pressure. So first is the pandemic itself, right? The fact that there's a stay-at-home order for us means that, generally speaking, doing repairs and whatnot at our properties is very difficult. We at this point are basically keeping all our repairs only to emergencies because, you know, and then we have to always ask for permission even to enter a property at this point and provide all the proper documentation. So that's one way. That's the first way. The second way is that, for obvious reasons, a lot of tenants right now are also under pressure. A lot of them have lost their jobs. And so therefore, a number of them cannot pay their rent. Now, nationwide, I read that about 80 to 85% of renters paid rent in the month of April. Our collection rate was 90%. That said, you know, so we had a 10% delinquency rate, or people who could not pay or could only pay partial. And keep in mind, April rent was for people who, for a lot of people, they worked half of March, right? So now we're in May. And for a lot of people, this is like, to put it bluntly, the come to Jesus moment, right? Like this is now, we're going to find out exactly what's happening in the multifamily market. I can say, literally, I was checking my numbers right before we came on. We're at 72% collection as of right now on May 6th. Some of our tenants don't pay till the middle of the month, whatever. So like, we expect those numbers to go up. What will we hit our 90%? I doubt it. I doubt that we'll get to 90%. Will we get to 80%? I hope so, but that would mean a doubling of the delinquency if we get to 80%. And I know that, obviously there's a lot of talk right now about what that means. So that's the second type of pressure on multifamily owners. Then the third type of pressure we're facing is all these edicts and legislation that's coming down the pike, either from the state or from local ordinances. And I know that Carol Glover will be speaking more about that. But there's two specific things that I just want to say about that. One on the state and one on the local. As many of you know, if you have property, every jurisdiction has different things. So, okay, let's start on the state, right? The state, there is a statewide right now, state of emergency. The governor has said that local jurisdictions can have eviction moratoriums, which the city of LA has one, and they can go even, more strict. So more than that, then the California Judicial Council says that they won't even be hearing unlawful detainers until 90 days after the end of the state of emergency, which at this point is May 31st. So that means 90 days after that is August 31st. But then, so now there's talk of a bill called AB 828, and somebody asked about that in the Q&A about what that is. And that is a state assembly bill that basically says that if tenants have not been able to pay their rent and they go into unlawful detainer, judges would have the potential right to then do a haircut of up to 25% of that amount. Now, this hasn't passed. It's being discussed in the state assembly. It's obviously very concerning for a lot of owners because even with these edicts, these ordinances, the rent is still eventually due. So, how that will be paid back, these are all questions. So that's number one. That's one concern on the state level. On the local level, just today, like this afternoon, the LA City Council passed a private right of action for tenants that if they renting and landlords do not basically follow all the rules of the eviction moratorium, which require notices, which require like all sorts of various things. If they don't follow those rules, tenants have the right to sue their owners up to $10,000 per case. I mean, which is, and this passed with 3/4 of the city council. Now, once again, it literally seems to be changing hour by hour. So what does this mean for the multifamily market? Well, two things to keep in mind. One, before this all happened, right, we had another crisis, which was a housing crisis, right? And in terms of that, we're still seeing leases. In fact, this week, like in the last week or so, we've seen an uptick in the number of leases. So that's number one. I would say the second thing, to say is that there may be some buying opportunities. I have recently signed 4 listing agreements. I have a 5-plex in Westlake that's on the market, and I have 3 coming soons. I have a duplex in El Sereno, I have a duplex in Silver Lake, and I have a 30-unit SRO in Boyle Heights. These are all from people who, at this point, have decided that they're ready to get out of the multifamily investing game. So those are all things for people to consider as they're moving forward. If you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Happy to answer them later. But these are interesting times. But there's also, as Yoli said, always opportunities in those times.
Thank you, Will. We do have a poll up that I'm gonna leave just for another couple of minutes. If you are a multifamily owner, we're curious to know what percentage of your tenants were not able to pay rent for May. So on May 1st, they didn't pay. They still have not paid. So far, it looks like half of tenants have paid on time, which is substantially less than when we did this last month. We had about 75 to 80% that actually paid on time. This time it's looking like about half. 13% say less than 10% did not pay. 10 to 20%, 31% of you that we surveyed said 10 to 20% did not pay, and only 6% thankfully said 20 to 30% did not pay, and no one is above 30%. So we'll be continuing to track these numbers. Our next multifamily call is on May 26th, so we'll make sure we get you that info out there as well. That's specifically just for multifamily owners. So we'll give a pitch at that towards the end, but please save that date. And well, do you remember what time? I think 4 o'clock as well, right?
Yes, it's also 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
It's actually May 27th. It's 3 weeks from today.
May 27th. I'll post that RSVP link in there. Now I'd like to step into Ms. Carol Glover, our real estate attorney for the day. She has a lot of interesting and important updates that I'm very excited to have her on. Welcome. Such an amazing lady. We're very happy to have you. And take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to echo what Will was just saying. This has just been an overwhelming time in real estate generally due to state and local regulations. We were already, due to the statewide legislation that was put in effect last year. First, we had middle of last year, we had SB 330, which was all this legislation was pushed by the housing crisis, and that one had an impact on how many, if you could tear down your units and what your replacement was for those units. You had to replace the number of units you had on the property to begin with. That was new. And then, of course, in January, it was AB 1482 with respect to rent control. Many cities in Los Angeles and Santa Monica, Long Beach, they already had rent control, but there were so many communities that just simply never occurred to them that they would ever have rent control. And so everyone was getting used to that and what the new regulations were. And then, of course, this happened. And now we have all the overlay of all the executive orders with respect to the moratorium. And it is so important because it's so confusing. I get calls every day, all day. What are my rules? Do I have to, how long do they have to pay? What are the tenants' rights? Can I ask for information? What can I do? And so we have to very specifically go through a flow chart of, you start with of course, the federal, state, county, look to whether your jurisdiction is unincorporated and within the county rules, or you're within the city, or you're within any of the other cities. And it's confusing because an example, well, I'm in Manhattan Beach. So El Segundo doesn't have its own rules and ordinances with respect to rent moratoriums and eviction moratoriums. So you have to look to the county. But Redondo Beach, which is a couple miles away, does have a very specific set of rules. So you really have to research. I was looking. I'm always looking for tools that are helpful to my clients, I did. I just have to give a shout out to. Is it the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles? They have a phenomenal spreadsheet on many different, not all jurisdictions, but many cities, county, on what the rules are. And boy, that is just, I found it to be excellent. That had to take a tremendous amount of time, and a big shout out for them. So if you're wondering what you need to do in your area, certainly Google it, research it, call an attorney, and then you don't have to call an attorney. If you can look at the one that was done on their website, it really gives you a good handle on what it is. Because the difficulty is that there's these ordinance that have been put into place, but the problem is because they were done in such a rush, and everybody understands it was rushed, there's really no thought about down the line as to what the consequences are and whether you can enforce certain things. So as an example, so LA County was put into place. I think Newsom's order was the 27th of March. LA County has its moratorium on evictions that goes back and is retroactive to March 4th. So theirs is retroactive to March 4th, and then it goes through the 31st. Very specific on what it covers, non-payment of rent. This particular one, the county gives tenants 12 months to repay. Other ones are 6. Long Beach is, I think I read, by November. You know, they're all different. And the interesting thing, and I had this from a commercial tenant, and also some of them apply to residential only, and some are residential and commercial. So where you are and what you own, you have to really pay attention to that as well. I found it very interesting, a commercial tenant that I was dealing with, based on Los Angeles County, had paid March rent, because at that time, things hadn't quite blown up yet, right? So in negotiating rent abatement, they wanted to go back and get credit based on the ordinance for March rent that was already paid. And so there was no, I got called by a broker saying, well, can we do that? Can we argue for that? Is there any case law? What's the rules on that? It's like, there are no rules. It's negotiate. And also detailed in terms of this private right of action, which I had not heard of that, Will, so thank you on that. Be very specific when you're looking at what you can ask for, and what your rights are, what the tenant's rights are. Under most of these ordinances, you can ask for proof for your tenant. If you're looking at a tenant, either residential or commercial, you can say, give me your reasons for inability. Why under COVID have you been unable to pay? In a commercial context, there's a much higher demand on the tenant to actually provide financials, provide their projections for the rest of the year. Have they gotten any government assistance as a business? And does the landlord have the right to claim any of that assistance? If they're sitting on money that they got as a loan, the landlord logically is going to want rent paid, use some of that money to pay the rent. In the residential context, it's a little touchier. In many of these jurisdictions, it's a self-satisfying, I cannot pay because of COVID. So, and there's not an opportunity in these to demand, and that's where a lot of that private right of action is going to come in if you don't follow the rules in the particular jurisdiction. So be very careful about that, and make sure you follow those. Some of the other ones that big issues, hot buttons right now are AB 828, and I just want to clarify that one. It's tricky. That's a tricky one. It's very detailed. It's true that the way the law is written is if the landlord files an action in unlawful detainer, which footnote you can't even get a summons issued right now because the Judicial Council has determined that they will not issue any summonses on the complaint. So many landlords, one, have not filed, or two, when they do file, they can file, but the complaint just sits there, kind of in a queue, until the Judicial Council opens up the gates of allowing summonses to be actually issued and served on the tenant. So what AB 828 provides for is a scenario where the tenant has been sued, has been served, has late payments, and also they've just determined that instead of answering the complaint as a tenant, they want to enter into a stipulated judgment with the landlord. It's at that point that the judge has the right to ask the landlord, basically, can you handle this haircut? The tenant, because the tenant wants the 25% reduction that's in the statute, and the landlord can object, but the judge has the right to make an inquiry. How many units do you own? 10 units or more, it's presumed that you have the financial wherewithal. You can take the haircut. And that's the danger about this one. Any apartment owner association out there has draft letters that you can, put your name in and fill out, provides the phone number so you can call. If you are a landlord, you got to activate your rights and your friends and put the word out on this so that you get activated on this, because the tenant rights groups are very active. I mean, there's a lot of distress in the tenant world, and I many of my clients are business owners, retailers, beauty shops, restaurants, completely shuttered. And many of my clients, I can name 5 right now. I don't think they're not going to make it. They're just simply not going to make it. And it's heartbreaking. So there's empathy on both sides, but there is already a very well-established unlawful detainer process in place. And so my personal opinion is that we already have this in place, and we're just layering more and more and more detail on this, and really taking away the rights of a landlord, a judge, to make a determination of whether the landlord has the financial wherewithal to withstand a reduction. So that's all I'm going to say about that one. So some other things that have come up, I don't know if these deadlines are going to be extended. I kind of think they will be. I'm not sure. Definitely the repayment plans are going to take a while to work out. One I saw today was talk about stresses in the industry that I think are going to exacerbate current situations. There is this move as we have rentals available again. Just be careful on the whole pet thing, comfort pet thing. There's definitely law firms out there who you place an advertisement for a rental unit and you say no pets available. They call and say they have some outrageous comfort animal. And if you don't accommodate that, you get a letter from an attorney saying, well, we want you to pay a fee or a settlement before we file a lawsuit against you. So my heart goes out to landlords. It's hard enough out there right now. And then there's that on top of it. And it's just going to take a while to shake out. It's one time in my over 30 years of practicing law where I cannot, because we just don't know. We're taking our best educated guesses based on current statutes, how laws have been interpreted in the past, how these new ordinances are going to play out in the future. And all you can do is make sure you cover yourself with reading the ordinances that apply to you. Put everything in writing. If you have a conversation with the tenant about some issue with the building, confirm it in writing. If you have a repayment plan, put it in writing. There are, CAR has forms out, and so does AIR in terms of doing accommodations and a repayment plan. So just get it in writing and make sure you have copious notes about this so that you can protect yourself in the future. So I'm going to let other people get in here, but and I'll certainly take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll definitely get to questions at the end. So if you do have any, please write them under questions. If there's anything if you want to chat with the panelist or chat with other people that are in the group, feel free to type anything in the chat box and we'll make sure we get to the questions. So the next speaker, I'm going to have Zoe speak to us from Title about a few stats and updates she has, and then we'll get into two of our lenders, Natalie Salins with Movement and Marty with Arcstone. So Zoe, why don't you go ahead and start. Also note that we do have a new poll up about your job status. We'd like to get a feel on how people are doing there. So go ahead, Zoe.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zoe Schulman, and I'm with Stewart Title. I've been doing this for quite some time. And yes, we're in a very unusual time right now, but I pulled some statistics which were a little bit surprising to me. They are from February 28th, the end of February, through April 28th. And there were a lot more sales recorded in Los Angeles County than I anticipated. But in analyzing it, these were sales that began in January and February and were closing in March and April. So that's why the numbers are pretty high. So as an example, for West Hollywood, there were 70 sales that closed in that time period. In zip code 90046, there were 9 closings. In 90048, there were 10. In 90069, there were 51. So I thought that was surprising. I don't know if there are specific cities that you'd want me to look at for you and tell you how they did in specific zip codes. But
at the end, I'm going to post everybody's contact info. So I know there are a lot of realtors on this call, so that would be awesome. If you do have any specific zip codes, please do that.
Now, in terms of current business, it has obviously slowed down substantially. I get a listing of new listing. I get every day, and you can see how limited the new listings are, that we certainly don't have what we had before, and there's not as many closings. What we are seeing a tremendous amount of, which I'm sure that Marty and Natalie can attest to, are refinances because the rates are so low. But I do think that with the changes now where they're opening up the city, I think that more people, certainly more buyers, will be willing to go out and look at houses, and more realtors will be willing to show them and I think are more open. So I think that for the end of May, definitely June, we're going to start to see, I don't know about a surge, but we're going to start to see more. I know that at the end of last week, now Los Angeles County is very large, and we have about 50 sales reps that work at Stewart Title. I believe we opened 50 resales on Friday, which was the most we had opened in the last month. So we're definitely seeing, we're seeing, and I'm finding my own personal clients are telling me that they have coming soon listings, that they're going to be opening up much more in the first week of June. So I'm anticipating that we're going to have a fairly busy summer, which hopefully will help everybody with your finances. Anything else you'd like me to talk about?
No, that's great.
But I do have statistics for pretty much every city and every zip code in Los Angeles County, again, from February 28th until April 28th.
Thank you, Zoe.
Hopefully that gives you a little bit of information. Thank you.
Thank you. So I completely agree with Zoe that we're most likely going to have relatively busy summer, and then we'll see what happens after that. If you are a buyer and you're out there, a busy summer is not necessarily the good or the best thing for you because there's more competition. You may have more to look at, true, but if you could find something now that's suitable, I would recommend getting out there now. I had a buyer who was looking for a 2-bedroom condo on the west side, and we wrote an offer on 2 properties last week, one in Culver City and one in Venice. They both had multiples. He ended up getting one of them, the one in Venice, and it sold for a little bit over asking. So, keep that in mind. There's still, if that's happening right now with, good properties, it's going to be tougher again once more people are out there, more listings come. So if you're a buyer, I would say a lot of these properties out there are vacant. At least go check out some of those and if there's a seller, just use your mask and be careful. But I would recommend, if you can buy now, check and see, because we really don't know what's going to happen with interest rates, if they're going to go up, what's going to happen with prices and so on. All I know is right now there is less competition, and it's not a bad time to buy. It's still a good time to buy, better than it was a couple months ago. So with that being said, let's get into my favorite part. Not that you all before were, you're all my favorite too, but I do love hearing about the money and what's going on there. So Marty, I did the poll. I'm going to share the results. So if anyone hadn't filled it out, you got a couple seconds left to fill it out. Just on your job status, if you're self-employed and your income is stable, if you're self-employed but you've had income decrease, if you're employed but your income is stable, or employed had income decrease or lost your job, where are you at? This is going to help frame our next part. I'm going to share those results with everybody right now. And Marty, you should be unmuted. I'm going to unmute you too, Natalie, if you want to chime in. But after Marty, definitely, Natalie, you'll have time to speak as well. But feel free to interact with each other. So welcome, Marty from Markstone and Natalie with Movement Mortgage.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm sure all of you guys are wondering what's going on in the lending world, especially programs and rates. So we'll fill you in between the two of us of what's going on in the state of lending. But majority of it is going to be what's happening in the market now. What programs are sticking around? What's going away? I really want to touch base on that one so you guys can all understand what's up ahead of us. So with this all liquidity crunch, or whatever you want to call it, lenders have basically stepped back a little bit and have reduced their box of lending. So what I mean by that is, traditionally, when we were very open to lend to people with lower FICO scores or less down payment, now we've pulled that back a little bit. Most lenders have pulled that back a little bit and have a smaller box. So your credit requirements have, you have to have a higher credit score or have a little bit more down payment to be able to purchase the property and or refinance in this case. So that said, that's happening, and it's continuing to happen as well, just because as things progress and if more data is available to us for us to analyze, we're having to reassess our risk capacities to make sure to see if we're going to be if we're going forward with either loosening up with the guidelines or becoming even tighter. The same thing happened the poll pulled up in front of me. The same thing happened in 2008, very similar things we experienced, except there's a lot more policies that are working against lenders these days. So it's making it harder for us to feel comfortable to open up the box and lend freely. What I mean by that is, the government in this case, which is Fannie and Freddie Mac's divisions, are basically coming up with laws that are stating that we won't be able to, create a liquidity channel for us to sell these loans to them. And if the loan is per se, if it's in a forbearance or if it's a particular type of a loan, such as a cash out transaction. So it's making it a little bit more restrictive for us to be able to have channels to sell these loans. So it's making it harder for a lender to feel a lot more comfortable to lend going forward. That said, who's being affected by this quite a bit? And most of it is going to be the government loans. Government loans have really taken a beating with this situation because let's say if we were able to lend to someone with a 580 credit score, that's really non-existent at this moment in time because lenders are reassessing their risk with the borrower that might end up with a 580 credit score, and they might end up in a forbearance. They might not be able to pay their payments in the next few months. And so therefore, that is, it's not a discriminatory thing. We're not saying we're not going to lend somebody for 580, but it's now becoming a situation where do we want to lend to people that can possibly end up being affected by the pandemic. Obviously, it's not because of their capacity to repay. It's just a lot of people are going to be forced into not having jobs and or being affected by their self-employment as well too. We've seen a lot of people Obviously, if you're not an essential business, you can't open up your business and you're forced to lose income at this moment in time. So we've seen in Will's world, obviously, where renters are not paying their rent payments, and it's truly affecting that individual's income. And now they can't make their mortgage payments. So we really have to keep this, it's like a supply chain, it's like it's going to affect the next person down the line, basically. So, and now in this case, it's happening with the renters not paying their rents, and therefore it's affecting the mortgage payments from the owners of the buildings. So the government loans have definitely had a much more of a restrictive hit to them. And it's just sad to see, but it's become that first-time home buyer market is going to become a smaller market, I would say, for the next little while, until we assess where we're headed with the forbearances and also the repayments. The next market that's been really affected is the higher end jumbo market. That market has really, a lot of lenders have exited the jumbo lending market, and they've decided to wait it out. So I use the word pause. So they're all pausing, they're lending, they're just saying, let's take it slow and let's see where this is going. So for example, I'll just throw this out there, which is one of the most notable lenders. So Wells Fargo has decided to exit a lot of the channels of lending as far as like the jumbo channels, but they've on their retail channel, they've decided that if they want to lend to you, you're gonna have a $250,000 deposit with them. So that makes it very difficult for someone to get a loan, besides the fact that they're gonna put down payment and or closing costs to have another $250,000 sitting around. Not a lot of us have that around. So that said, that's going to make it a little bit more restrictive for people to be able to get loans. So they're going to have to go to particular lenders that have access to them. Thankfully, both Natalie and I have those capacities, which is helpful. But the banks are really stepping it up as well too, and they're trying to come in on their retail channels. So. But the banks are the banks. They're going to give you a lot more of a harder time as far as qualifying. And when I say harder, they're just not going to understand, some of the income sources that you would get. And it just, as every realtor, if we have a lot of realtors on the Zoom meeting right now, I'm sure you all know that when you go to a bank, they don't understand an entertainment person's income, or they don't understand how to extract all the dollars from someone's tax return. So it makes it very hard when you're working with a tunnel vision type of a environment. So so that's going to be a little bit more difficult for the higher end market. Now the good part is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have decided that they said they're going to keep buying loans as long as they're not in forbearance, as long as it's not a risky loan, they'll keep buying them. So that's really helped us in the world of lending to have a channel to sell these loans, to create more liquidity for us to be able to keep giving out loans. And so that's been really, really helpful. So that brings me to my biggest and most important topic, and that's the forbearance, obviously. And I think everybody has talked about that so far. But the forbearance has been really one of the most important things that have affected our assessment of risk, because what we're looking for is this person likely to file for forbearance? Is this person likely to lose their job or experience loss of income? So those are questions that an underwriter, when they're approving your loan, they ask themselves or they ask their risk managers to find out if this is a possibility. And so a good loan traditionally that would have been approved may not be approved this day. Like they might say, you're not an essential business. So you're even though you had a great 2017, 18, and 19, and the first quarter, you're no longer going to be making good money, obviously. The good part about it is that, the interesting part, I should say, is that we've seen the first quarter earnings from a lot of people, and they've been very solid. In fact, they were better than 2019's earnings. And but it's a steep dive down for a lot of people. So that's what's making it where we don't know. It's an uncertain time for us because we have not seen any documentations and or information to document where this income is going. And so when there's uncertainty, that's when you proceed with caution, obviously. And so that's where we're basically all of our heads are at. Until more data is coming out, and that's why I'm asking everybody, and earlier I was asking Zoe for data. I said I'm a nerd when it comes to numbers. So as long as the more data we get, the more decisions we could make to be able to loosen up guidelines and or increase or reduce the guidelines, I should say. Reducing guidelines is not a bad thing. I would say it's going to keep us all safe down the line. It doesn't mean that we're now reducing the guidelines or making it more restrictive. And because we don't want to lend, we're just really watching out for the real estate industry by watching out by who we give the loans out to, because we don't want to recreate a 2008 all over again. I've seen values so far sustained. We're getting appraisals coming in at value. I'm not seeing decline in values, which has been very surprising. I would have already seen. I thought I would have already seen that movement downwards, but it is somewhat early because we do look back 6 months. But it would have already reared its head essentially by now. So it hasn't come up. So especially in Los Angeles, I haven't seen that experiencing the drop in values. So that's been really positive. I mean, that's what's keeping us moving forward. It's making us feel a lot more comfortable about lending because we're not seeing a huge decline in values. That's like the two positive things: Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac buying loans from in the market and values sustaining itself. So it's been really helpful. The other thing I wanted to just, the forbearance thing. I mean, we really wanted to get into that a little bit more. Is we've been talking about, do you really need to file for forbearance? How does this affect your credit? These are questions I get all the time. And even though the marketing from the government and or media is that it's not going to affect your credit, you are going to be able to skip payments without ramifications, I would 100% disagree with this information, because it will affect your credit, because it will show that you have not made a mortgage payment for that month. Even though it's not going to affect your credit score, because now it doesn't show it's a 30-day late payment and you're in forbearance, it will show that you need to skip the payment. It's gonna be somewhat of an oxymoron. You're gonna have a high credit score with mortgage payments that are not being made. So traditionally, we've never seen that happen. I'm not sure if a forbearance on your credit report will at one point affect it. With the point systems that as you all know, that there's it's between 350 to 850 credit scores. So I'm not sure if your points are going to drop, but we've been informed that it's not going to show up on your credit report as a 30-day late, which traditionally pulls your scores down. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that it will show up on your credit report. We've already seen people, and I'm not sure about Natalie's side of things, but I've seen credit reports come over with a verbiage that says in forbearance. And that
Marty, just one example. So I just checked on Credit Karma. There was an update for me, and it said that comment being removed, and it said loan modification, non-government being removed sometime recently. So I don't know when I had it modified. Sometime during that last time I had my something changed, but it seemed like it was quite a while ago. So I guess that comment has been on there ever since. And now finally they're just removing that.
Wow. So okay. So
and I didn't ask for it to be removed. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So traditionally, credit scores and credit reports have been almost like a bureaucracy where you don't, once something gets on there, it's really hard to remove it. And similarly with data that's coming into it, it's really difficult to find out what's going to happen. I mean, U.S. Bank has put on their forbearance agreement, they have said on there, it could affect your credit score, but it should not affect your credit score. It's like a weird comment on their forbearance letter that they're sending out to their clients. So it shouldn't affect your credit. It could, if the servicer decides to report it on your credit report, it should be removed. It's good, good luck getting that removed. And in your case, it was positively affecting you. Now it's removing
yeah, but who knows how many years ago that was that it was on there? Because I mean, this could be 10 years ago.
I
So
think
that
you're
was it.
definitely the minority. It usually
Yeah.
affects you negatively, not positively.
Yeah.
So this is a good thing.
Well,
So,
I'm saying
so what do you,
it's negative because it's been there for 10 years. So,
yeah, yeah. And so therefore, I mean, what I would say with that is from a practical standpoint, when you go to get a mortgage down the line, let's say, you file for forbearance and 6 months from now or a year from now, you find some good deal, we're going to see that on your credit report. We're going to look at that and we're going to assess that you actually filed for forbearance. A lot of the automated underwriting systems are going to stop it from being approved as well too. And again, these are assumptions that I'm putting out there, but this is what we experienced in 2008. And so we'll probably go the same path. I haven't been told otherwise so far that anything's going to be any different. Hopefully we will find information that will say that, if it was in forbearance, we're still going to approve a file. Nothing like that has come out. But so far, if a file is in forbearance, you're an immediate decline. We're not going to give you another loan, essentially, for another
okay.
property. So those are things I really wanted to make sure. And then, one thing I did want to say, like the progression of a forbearance could also be a terrible thing in a sense of if you do not have the capacity to repay that forbeared payments, which is going to be either due at the end of the forbearance process period or in a period that the servicer might allow you to repay within a 6-month period or a year period. If you can't make that period up, you're going to have to go into an actual modification, and the modification you have to qualify for. And if the modification you don't qualify for, let's say you are still unemployed and the servicer thinks you're not going to make that payment, you're not going to be able to make that payment, they might not grant you the modification, which turns into a bigger problem, which is going to turn to a notice of default at one point because you haven't made your payments and you're not making up the payments. And it could turn into a short sale or foreclosure as well. So the progression is, not a positive thing. So you really want to ask your realtor, you really want to ask your lenders of how to handle the situation and how to budget for this as well. I just think it's, being advertised very willy-nilly type of a way. I really do think there's got to be a lot more thought process put behind the actual steps taken for it, and if you really do
All
need
right.
it, you do it. So.
I think we covered that completely. Let's move on to, thank you, Marty, that was great, to Natalie. And one question I noticed, Natalie, was someone was saying, will a commercial loan forbearance affect your credit score also? Is it pretty much the same that Marty was explaining?
Commercial loans don't normally show up on your personal credit report. So honestly, we wouldn't necessarily know about it on a commercial loan. So.
Okay, got it. And you can share your screen if you need to.
Oh, okay, cool.
Marcia said, yeah.
I think obviously Marty touched a lot on the forbearance thing. I think just as a quick add, it's just important that everybody understands that forbearance doesn't mean forgiveness. And the media is not doing a good job of explaining this to people. And that's why so many people are ending up in forbearance, even if they didn't mean to. They're just calling to find out about it, and somehow they're in it. So you have to be really, really careful because it doesn't mean forgiveness. And it's important that you understand what your terms are, what it means when you go into it. If you have to pay it back within 6 months, what that means for you. Fannie and Freddie are saying they are not going to try to foreclose on you or take the loan into a modification if you can't pay it back within the 6 months, but they certainly will have the legality to. You don't want to get into a place where you are on the verge of possibly losing your home or getting into a place where it looks like you are at risk, So you just have to be really careful nowadays, understand what it means to be in the deferment program, what your terms are with your servicer. There are so many ways to get around this. If at all possible, pay your mortgage. You can stop paying your student loans. You can stop paying credit cards. You can stop paying car loans. There's so many ways around it to at least ensure that you get your, sorry, this thing just popped up, to get that mortgage statement paid, because it's important. It's important to do for sure. So yes, there's that. Also, just want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up. because it's happening now as well, a lot of people who are signing up for these PPP programs or SBA loans, if you have a company, for lending purposes, if we see those PPP loans funnel through onto your bank statement, or the SBA loans come in onto your bank statement, the underwriter is not going to like that. They're going to feel that you are incapable of paying your own bills and that your business is taking a halt in earning income because you've asked for a loan in order to keep going. So you have to be very careful on that as well. So if we see those coming into the bank statements, I haven't seen it yet. I have been very careful, so to speak, with it. So my underwriters haven't seen it. So I'm not 100% how they're going to handle. Maybe if we get a very good letter of explanation for it, we'll be okay. But at this point, it does represent risk for the client, for the buyer, for the borrower. If they are unable to, you're asking for PPP and SBA loans and all of these grants that are being given right now because you're unable to pay your bills. That's what they are. That's what they're there for. With that said, if you're unable to do those things, you shouldn't maybe buy a house, or just wait until things are stabilized in your world before going forward with that. So I have a couple slides that I thought were really interesting, that I thought you might be interested in checking out. Can you guys see this? The last 5 recessions. Just a little something. It can be a little positive in this world right now. So the last 5 recessions since 1980, if you actually see, home prices went up for 3 of the 5. And one of them was legit a housing recession. It was a housing crisis. And that's obviously what went down in 2008 by a fairly large amount of 20%. 1991, that recession went down very little, 1.9%. And that's probably why we're seeing that our appraisals are coming in at normal, and why we haven't necessarily seen a huge drop in housing prices, because the demand is still out there and the inventory in Los Angeles is always a little bit low. So for purchasing out here, that's a good thing. So there's that. And then I wanted to share unemployment rates right now are obviously very high in Los Angeles. I think we're like pushing the high 20%, 28, 29% in LA. But as quickly as we went up in LA, we're expecting it to go back down once things start opening up, based on the LA market and our entertainment situation out here. This is also an interesting slide to note. So these are unemployment rates based on home sales. So you can see unemployment really kind of goes up and down. Home sales don't necessarily change based on the peaks and valleys of unemployment. It's a pretty interesting chart. And it goes all the way back to 1989. So kind of stays a little bit stable in there. Of course, besides like the rally of home sales in 2003, 4, and 5 that we saw. But that was more of a lending thing because we were giving loans to everybody out there and their dogs. But this is Goldman Sachs' projection of unemployment in the next few years. So as we're seeing now, 15% is really countrywide. Not necessarily for LA, it's higher here, but you can see in 2021, we're expecting it to go down by half. So everything should really stabilize in the next year and a half or so, based on what we're seeing. And that's just a little quote. This is a great recession for leisure, hospitality, trade, and transportation, in that this recession will feel as bad as the Great Recession did to housing. Last time housing led to recession, this time housing is poised to actually bring us out of it. So let me stop the share.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So do you have anything else, or should we get to a few questions I have?
Not necessarily, just that things are coming back here and there. A couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, especially, things were looking much more grim in the jumbo world. Things are slowly coming back in jumbo world. I'm getting more investors coming back in slowly, tapping their foot in the water. So things are opening up much more than they were. And my FHA was at 640. We changed our FICO score to a minimum of 640. Now I'm back down to 620, which is great. Again, that 580 to 620 mark, that's always been a little bit of a separate program with FHA anyway. And of course, right now with the risk, so lenders are taking risks doing any loan right now. Because of the amount of unemployment happening on a daily basis, when we close a loan, we don't know for sure if that person's gonna have a job the very next day or the next month or the next week, right? So it's all a little bit of a risk. The reason that you see the 580 to the 620 go away is because those are already very risky people. So they're not willing to step out on a limb on those kind of risk files because they're already very high risk files. Right now, just a perfect file tends to be a little bit of a risk file anyway, because, you know, again, what's happening with unemployment and how many people are going into forbearance and things like that.
All right. One question, actually, maybe Natalie, you can answer, or Marty. The question is, how do you value rental properties when so many tenants can't pay rent? So say you have 20% rental vacancy, how do you value that? Do you not count the rent at all? Do you count future rents, or?
So we value it the same as we would a standard appraisal. Appraisals are valued based on comps. So that's how we would take it. If it's currently vacant, then we go off something called market, a rent schedule that the appraiser does. So we go off market rents. What did the house next door currently rent at, or the units down the street currently rent at? That's what the appraiser will set as his rent schedule if it's vacant.
Okay.
Can I say something about that?
Mm-hmm.
Can I say something about that? Let me attack that question in a different way. So what I'm seeing, at least in this current market, is that those properties that are currently have vacant units are sitting longer than they normally would, because in a rent-controlled universe, which we live in mostly, if you're selling in Los Angeles, you know, generally speaking, most people wanted vacant units because then they could basically charge market rents, right? But now, if you don't have the income already coming in, now that's considered a liability because lenders are not lending if they don't see some income in there, is what we're hearing. So maybe you guys, maybe Natalie and Marty, you can tell me, but that's what we're hearing on the agent side.
I think what you're talking about, the differentiation is what Natalie said is very valid for the residential side. The experience that you're having when the rents are not coming in, the devaluation or the valuation of the property is based off of, on commercial side of things, is based off of the rents coming in. So it's treated as a business. So on the commercial side, if you don't have the property rented, it's a negative, and the rents are not coming in. It's definitely affecting the valuation of the property. Has anything changed where the property has changed location? No. Has the look and the feel of the property changed? No, but it's the form of evaluating a property, and lending practices in the commercial side of things is when you have a property that's not rented or not, you know, we call it sometimes unstable properties. That's where it's going to be affecting the valuation because there's not enough lending for it. So, and the word is debt servicing. If it's not debt servicing, then, you know, there's no lending for it, or you have to put a lot more money down. So it's two separate worlds, obviously, commercial and residential.
And this is for Carol. Carol, can a landlord enforce an occupancy limit for new rental lease? California State Health Code laws state that occupancy limits are 2 people per bedroom and 1 per living room. Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, I heard West Hollywood City Council discussing this and saying that they wanted to have no limit on how many people could come in right now. How would you answer this? 1 second. Oh, go ahead.
We cancel each other out.
You did.
Again, you have to check if Hollywood is talking about shifting that and changing it. You have to check locally. I haven't seen anything out there, and I didn't know about the Hollywood discussion there. So again, you have to check. It's really hyper local, and you have to check locally. I don't see any reason you can't enforce that, but it could be a problem if there is another ordinance in place.
Okay. If your tenant does not pay the rent, can you report it to a credit bureau?
Again, some of these orders specifically say that you cannot ding their credit. So you just have to be careful. Some say don't, some don't, are silent on it. So you have to check your local ordinances.
Okay,
Also on the, that also applies for any kind of interest or penalties on failure to pay. Some of them say you cannot charge those charges under these eviction moratoriums, and some are silent. So check on that too. So when you're calculating how much rent they have to repay, to see whether you can add those charges in or you're prohibited from doing so.
Okay. Kelly, if you are, oh, where'd you go, Kelly? Oh, you might have got off. You had a question. Okay, we'll get an answer to her after. Okay, if there's anyone else who has a question, now's your time to type it in. Go ahead.
I had a question that was asked by text. Somebody asked me about HELOCs. HELOCs are equity lines of credit and how they're shifting in the market. They are changing. So one of our largest equity line lenders that we can do first and seconds on. So that means you can do like an 80-10-10. You do a first loan and a second loan. You do a second loan as a HELOC. That investor backed out yesterday. So, and it was a very large investor that did a ton of seconds here in Los Angeles. We still have other sources, so we are still doing them. I have 2 other incredible sources that will actually do a HELOC second. One of them has decided to back out of doing HELOC seconds on refinances. They will only do them on purchases now. And then the other one I have is incredible. They'll do up to 5% equity, a 600 FICO, and will do purchases, refis. They'll do HELOCs on investment properties. They're like nuts. They're out of New York, but they're my favorite. And the rates are high, of course, because as I always say, anything with high risk, what does that mean? Higher rates. That's just how it goes. So, but we can get them done. But there is a tightening on HELOCs right now. Of course, if you remember, if anybody was around and remembers, in 2007, 2008, a lot of HELOCs went down completely. And that's because most of them, went bankrupt. They were too cash poor to continue. When there were 150 short sales being registered every day in Los Angeles in 2008, what was happening is all the loans were set up as 80-20s. So 2 loans, again, getting a first and a second, the second being a HELOC. When homes lost their value and people were short selling them all, guess who doesn't get paid when the bank only makes a portion of what they gave? The second lender never gets paid. So a lot of second lenders, most of them backed out of the market completely. So we are seeing a tightening of them. I hope that's all the tightening we see is what we've seen thus far, but being that we just got that new update yesterday, there might be more. So HELOCs are around, but they are definitely going to get a little tighter, and they're more expensive a little bit as well.
Got it. All right, everybody, I think that's all of our time for today. Everyone's contact info is up there, so please jot it down. These are some amazing resources that we have for you. Any other questions you have, feel free to reach out to me directly at Anthony at The Collective Realty. And if you want to share this video with anyone, it will be up tomorrow on our YouTube page at The Collective Realty. And again, thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Natalie. Great information, and thank you for everybody, especially who joined us today. We really appreciate it. Our next webinar will be focused just on multifamily owners, and the RSVP link for that is larealestatewebinar.com. That will be May 27th at 4 o'clock, and we'd love to have you there. And stay tuned for more exciting education we have for you coming soon. All right, guys, have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.